I'm really pleased to be here and to launch this report, which I think is an important report because the whole issue of women's leadership is often ignored. And both the achievements and the barriers that women face do need to come out, and we do need to try and understand and also understand as well as promote women in these sectors. Part of the report that you will present also includes some of my journey. And today I would like to start on a personal note and talk a little bit about how I came into this sector and how I developed whatever qualities and leadership qualities that I did have. And I'd also like to share the lessons on leadership that I have learned. So on a personal note, my education was in Delhi University. I did mathematics, and then I moved to the US to study. I did another degree in mathematics and then changed to economics. And while I was doing my PhD in economics, I actually visited India. Those days, you know, you didn't just go back and forth. So after 3 years, I came back to India, and I then realized that although I had come from a privileged background where I could study and be abroad, but most of a very large percentage of our people lived in poverty. And I felt, let me try, I should do something. And so I took a leave of absence from my studies. I was at Yale University in the US, and I took a leave of absence, and I joined SEWA. I wanted to join a women's organization. I was quite active in the women's movement, and I joined SEWA for a year, and I worked in SEWA for a year. And then I extended my leave from PhD for another year, and then for another year, and then I never actually went back. And the reason I never went back is I found that what I could contribute to the least privileged people, to the women at the base of the pyramid, was actually not only giving me satisfaction, which it was, but also making a change in people's lives. And I thought that would be the highest thing that one could do. A little bit about what I did. When I joined, I started working with these women who were making quilt covers out of little pieces of cloth. And they were getting very, very low rates. And so we had to negotiate with their employers who were giving them this work to increase their rates. But in doing so, many of the women got unemployed. And so they said, why can't we form our own little company? And so not a company, but we formed a cooperative. And I took responsibility for forming and running that cooperative. I did not come from a business background, but I learned as I went along. And as this cooperative developed, a lot of women got work. And it was very satisfying to create a new organization, which was benefiting so many poor women. After that, I moved to a larger sphere of building up women into a trade union. Now, who are these women? They were the women who were making, like the quilt covers, making a lot of stitching in their homes. There were women who were domestic workers, who were construction workers, agriculture workers, and so on. And they needed to negotiate. So the women who were street vendors needed to negotiate space with the municipality. Women who were home-based workers needed to negotiate better rates. Women who were domestic workers needed better skills. And so I took the responsibility of bringing them together and building up the SEWA Union. From there, we got a lot of requests to move. We were working in Gujarat. SEWA started in Gujarat. And SEWA, by the way, stands for Self-Employed Women's Association. It was started in 1972 by Ila Bhatt. It started as a trade union of women in the informal sector, and it moved away from just only trade unionism, only for rights, into forming the cooperative. Was the first organization which brought women into the market. But prior to that, SEWA also formed its own bank. It was the first microfinance institution in India. And so we worked on this whole issue of developing new institutions for women, as well as working with their rights. So rights and development together. So as SEWA grew, I got requests from other states. We were working in Gujarat. I got requests from other states that we should come and form SEWAs there. And then we started going to other states, and over time, we formed many, many new SEWAs. And those many new SEWAs then federated into an organization called SEWA Bharat. SEWA takes membership. So every time, every year, we go back to the informal sector women, to these women at the base of the pyramid, and we take a membership fee. The reason is that by actually giving their money, they become a member, they become an owner of the organization. And by becoming an owner of the organization, they also create their own responsibility for the organization and also their demands on the organization. So when I joined, I think we must have had about maybe 1,000 members, maybe a little less. But over time, we grew, and now SEWA does have something like, I think the last membership was 1.7 million members. So this is the story, and my own personal story also, of growth, and growth of not only one institution, but the formation of many, many new institutions, all coming together for the same objective. I wanted to share what I found was important in building up leadership. Let me first say personally, my own leadership. What I found very important was to understand the larger goal of what we were doing. Where we were, we means where the women were, where the informal sector women, the domestic workers, the agriculture workers, the construction workers, where they were in the economy, in the social sphere, and where we wanted to take them, what was the larger goal. It was coming into the mainstream. It was improving their lives by bringing them together, by increasing their rights, and improving their lives in very specific ways of economic security, social security. And I'm not going to go deep into that because it will take quite a lot of time. But my point I want to make is that if you really want to do leadership, you have to understand what is the larger goal of the institution you're working with. What is your larger aim? What is the vision that you're working towards? Again, on a personal note, I should tell you that work often, and especially work with informal sector women, where you move, say, 2 steps forward and a step and a half back, it can be very frustrating. And unless one always keeps the larger goal in mind, one can get burnout, one can lose motivation. And so I think one important part of the leadership, as I mentioned, is always keeping the larger goal in mind. Another important part of leadership is responsibility. That whatever task one takes up, one needs to be responsible for it. So it is my task. And I think taking responsibility is an important part of leadership. Another part which I have discovered in SEWA, and may be true for many other organizations also, is that there are many women, men also, but since I come from a women's organization, who are professionals, who are educated, and who are ready to work in a larger cause. And if they're able to do that, they would need to understand the women in the informal economy. Because in an organization like SEWA, we have professionals, educated people, women, as well as a lot of women who have come up from the ranks, who are from the informal economy. So another part of leadership is building these teams, what people call multi-stakeholder or multi-sectoral teams, and what I understand as teams of women who are professionals, but also who are professionals, some who are only just educated, and some who are not even educated or very minimally educated. How does everybody work together? How do you overcome your prejudices against each other? How do you understand each other's strengths and weaknesses? So that's another part, integrating these teams. Yet another part of leadership I discovered is you can't just look inwards, you have to be looking outwards of the institution that you're working with. So in my case, and in the case of SEWA, we are a bridge in a way from the issues of the base of the informal sector women with less economic security, with hovering at poverty, their real issues, their real lives, and the larger world, the policymakers, the private sector, the market. We are the link. We are the ones who bring in resources from outside, who take in the message of these poor women to the larger world, to policymakers. And so the skill of dealing external to your institution, is very much part of leadership. Yet another part is growing yourself. In SEWA, my experience was that I had to keep taking new things on because the needs of the women are manifold. They need to reach the market. They need healthcare. They need education for their children. They need to get a better income. So there are so many, they need housing. So there are so many needs which develop, and these needs over the decades have changed. Earlier, poverty was very rife, very widespread, and what will I eat the next day was the main question they had. Today, poverty is less, and the question is, what is my security? What is my longer term security? What happens when I go old? How will my children be educated and get good jobs? And I need a house of my own. So the needs change, and with the needs, the organization has to change. And the organization can only change if leadership changes. And so growing yourself always is very important. And finally, I think humility. Humility is a very important part. One does have to realize that one does not know everything. One needs to listen. One needs to not stick to one's point of view, but be willing to change. That's the lessons that I have learned, which I wanted to share with you, lessons over many decades. I'd also now like to tell you that what I have learned is what a woman, an educated professional, I don't know if I would call myself professional, maybe the only profession I had is being an economist, but everything I have learned is really from the grassroots women. And I want to take you to these grassroots women and tell you that leadership is not confined to professional people, educated people. What we have found is that in every mohalla, in every village, in every area, there are women. I'm sure there are men also, but since we are talking about women, there are women who have a leadership potential, who want to contribute, who want to bring themselves out of just their own little household, their own concerns, and take a larger role. And our task is to identify these women, to give them that leadership role, give them the role where train them to deal with the external world, to take responsibility to deal with the external world, to take messages to other women, to explain to them the institution. And the reason that we have been able to reach 1.7 million women continuously is because 1.7 million women and their families continuously is because we have this large contingent of grassroots leaders. Just to give you, and before I end, to give you an example, we cannot move ahead without mentioning the pandemic that is upon us and the disruptions it has caused. And it has caused disruptions in everybody's lives. But in the base of the pyramid, among people who hover on poverty, it has caused tremendous disruption. We have seen hunger even today. People lost their jobs, there's no income. And there is also disease and there is fear. In such a situation, we have seen the local leadership, the leadership of these women who themselves are domestic workers and construction workers and small farmers. We have seen their leadership blossom. They have identified the vulnerable people in their communities who do not have food, and they have contacted governments and civil society organizations to bring them food. They identified which are the government benefits that should be coming to women. They helped them to open their bank accounts and get their cash transfers. They equipped themselves digitally. They grew. They got WhatsApp groups. They understood how to work a smartphone. They reached out to women in their communities and brought them the messages of how to deal with COVID, how to look after your health. So really, leadership potential exists. It exists in every sphere of society. It exists among the masses. It exists among those who are newly educated. It exists among the professionals. But it needs to be tapped. It needs to be trained. It needs to be institutionalized. And as individuals, we need to recognize our own leadership potential. And we need to take responsibility and leadership without fear. And fear, that is something that women often face. And that is something that we all need to overcome and recognize what is the potential within us personally, but also within all the people that we are working with. Those are some of the lessons that I have learned. I'd like to move to the study that has been done and that will be launched today. And I am very pleased to see that many women have been interviewed on how they have taken leadership in these difficult they've taken leadership throughout time and also are taking it in these difficult times. They have shared their struggles, their achievements, and this report which will be presented now, gives us, I think, hope into what we can do. So I'm happy to present this report on women's leadership in the development sector. This is by Arthan. in collaboration with the Rockefeller Foundation. And it gives us an insight into the various kinds of challenges and biases women face at the workplace, both conscious and unconscious. It also, I should add, biases women face not only in the workplace, but also in society and in their homes. But it also gives us solutions, and it gives us solutions that organizations can apply to make the workplace and maybe society more gender inclusive. The report also includes inspiring case studies based on the lives of a diverse set of women leaders from the development sector. I hope this report will be useful for organizations that are trying to understand what they can do to be more gender inclusive. And I should say, I come from a women's organization, which is all women, so we need to be perhaps more gender inclusive for men. But in general, most organizations are, whether we like it or not, male dominated, coming from patriarchal society. And so they do need to understand gender inclusivity. And it needs to also make young women, it will also enable young women and men to be more knowledgeable, understanding of the challenges women face in their journey, and understand what they can do to make the development sector more equitable for women. So I launched this report, and I'd like to hand it back to Achal to tell us more about the report.
Thank you so much, Renana Ben. I'll be doing a short presentation before sharing the link of the report, but I think your talk was, gave us such a comprehensive understanding of leadership, both, leadership at the community level, at a professional level, and of course the story of SEWA is much inspiring in terms of the number of institutions that have been formed over the past couple of years. And I remember when we interviewed you, you shared how very different kind of organizations SEWA has formed, and the ones that you have been at the helm of, in terms of setting them up, learning new things from scratch, and then bringing these women together and working for their rights and for their development. So I think it's been a very, very inspiring and enlightening session, and thank you so much again for sharing this with us. I am now going to request my colleague Mridula to share a poll that we will be doing, just to get an understanding of the audience in the room, post which in a minute or so I'll begin a short presentation about the study, and then we will be sharing the link to the study. So as all of you can see on your screens, there are a couple of short questions just to understand a little bit more about you. This is only for the audience, so anybody who's a panel member will not be able to access this, will be able to take part in this. As you answer these questions, I will also share my screen to begin the presentation. Mridula, is my screen visible?
Yeah, Anju.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us for the report launch of the study on women's leadership in the development sector. This is by Arthan in collaboration with the Rockefeller Foundation. I'll first begin just sharing about why we wrote this report. We understood that in our day-to-day conversations, we did understand, and through our experiences, we did understand that there is, in terms of the number of women working, especially at senior leadership roles, or in terms of the kind of biases that are prevalent, as Renana Ben also mentioned, not only at the workplace but in society and home. We wanted to understand the implications of that on women who are who eventually do join leadership in various organizations. Our research helped us understand that companies that are actually led by women often outperform those led by men, whether it's in terms of revenue, growth, retention, or productivity. But when we look deeper at the development sector in India, which is meant to be a torchbearer of gender equality, it still has a long way to go. In terms of senior leadership, most roles are still held by men, though the second in line may be women. Also, in terms of policies and culture, we have a long way to go before we truly become gender inclusive. So a few months ago, Arthan, in collaboration with the Rockefeller Foundation, embarked upon this journey to understand, what are the challenges that women actually face? How can they overcome them? What is the role that men can play as allies? And finally, what is it that organizations can do to begin being more gender responsive and gender inclusive? The study is divided into two parts. In part A of the study, we had the honor and privilege of interviewing 50 plus women leaders in the development sector. And as I mentioned, one of them being Renana Ben. And as part of those interviews, we learned a lot about the kind of challenges that women face during their life journey, and we have used this trajectory of a woman's life journey to use that as the basis to understand different challenges and what can be done to mitigate those challenges. Coupled with these interviews, we also spoke to a lot of male leaders in the sector to understand their perspective. We obviously collated secondary data, and we also did a survey of 100 plus development sector professionals across all genders and demographics to gain better insights. In part B of the study, we will be sharing individual case studies of these 50 women who we have interviewed in an attempt for the studies to serve as guides of inspiration for women leaders who are moving up the ladder, and for men to be more cognizant and sensitized to the kind of challenges that their female counterparts at home or work may be facing. These are only a few of the organizations that were a part of the study, and we are immensely thankful to them for their time and their patience and their insights. Here I just share a short snapshot of our reports index. As we move from left to right, you can see after the forward introduction and the methodology. In part A of the study, we are covering 7 phases in a woman's life, from childhood to education, to when a woman joins the workforce, to the time that she actually actively participates in the workforce, to marriage, motherhood, and eventually leadership roles. Please note that this is only an indicative life journey. We are in no way implying that every woman goes through this exact journey or every woman is meant to. This is just to serve as an indicative guide of what are the more prevalent challenges that come about. After this, we have a section on the role of men as allies. And finally, we do share various policies and practices that organizations can actually implement to be more gender inclusive. In part B of the study, we have the 50 case studies from the women, and followed by conclusion and next steps. This is a brief summary of what we really learned from this study. In terms of challenges, we did learn that even before women enter the workforce, they are already at a disadvantage in terms of the biases and prevalent culture that's already there in most areas. As a part of the workforce, again, they enter an unequal terrain where there are challenges and biases from hiring to mentorship, rewards, safety, networking challenges, various kind of microaggressions they face. And then as women get married or enter motherhood, there is also a great trend of them falling out of the workforce because they're unable to manage the tasks at home and work without adequate support. As a result, we see that the number of women at the leadership level is definitely a lot lesser than it ought to be. In terms of the solutions, we see that organizations don't only need to have strong gender inclusion policies. It's very important to ensure the internalization of the same, so that no one feels penalized if they actually do end up, asking for implementation of the same, and to ensure strict implementation of these policies. Some other practices like flexible working hours and building a conducive work culture along with support by male counterparts is something that we feel basis this study is immensely helpful. And a lot of women also spoke about the great value in terms of the mentorship support and coaching or access to networks that they achieve. As next steps, we intend to continue our dialogue on gender inclusivity and women's leadership in the development sector. As to understand more and more of these sessions that we are doing, you can please check www.arthanevents.com or write to me at anchal@arthancareers.com. We will also be working to building a network of women leaders who can support one another as well as mentor younger women. We are going to be working on various capacity building programs for different stages of leadership that women belong to. And finally, we intend to continue this research. This particular study is only an initial step towards understanding these challenges, and we need to work a lot more to see how we can get to more nuanced challenges and understanding more nuanced solutions for the same. I would really like to thank everyone who has been a part of this study, everyone who gave us their time, as well as my colleagues who have been working on this along with me.